which is not supposed to be.
And I get it. I'm in the same boat. I hate when it's like I genuinely do not like when people sing happy birthday to me. Everyone sings it too slow. It's happy birthday. I'm just like, nope. So when I'm playing shows, it's very common. I would say more than 1 out of 10 shows, somebody will come up and say, hey, so-and-so up there, Stephanie, she turned 35 today. Can you sing her happy birthday? And they throw a 20 in the pot or whatever. I do it. That's how fast I do it. Because nobody wants to sit and listen to it for that long, especially not the person whose name is in it.
And be stared at the entire time where you're like, am I supposed to be entertaining you right now? Yeah.
I do not get any joy out of people singing me happy birthday.
So I don't know if I ever told you this. My number one pet peeve in life is when people sing to me. It is so like if you're at a concert and like people are vibing with whatever's going on in the band, and you know how you'll like turn and you like sing to your friend. That is my number one pet peeve in all of life. I don't know why, but it is. Yeah, always has been.
That totally. I can absolutely agree with that. And well, welcome to Sunday Plus.
Welcome to Sunday Plus.
We are 2 weeks in to making miracles.
That's right. I believe we've made some miracles.
We made some miracles.
There's been some great moments. Yeah.
It's been good stuff so far. This has been a good series, and yeah. It was a fun Sunday all around.
It was a fun Sunday. It was interesting. It was a fun Sunday. Normally in my kind of whimsical humorous style or like trying to insert jokes and stuff, there was a few, but it was mostly like a kind of a heavy sermon on some level.
Yeah. But it felt like it might have been influenced by what's going on just around the world at the moment. With just so many heavy things happening. And I felt like that probably influenced some of just what you felt compelled to talk about. And it not political or anything, but still felt like this feels influenced by world events.
Yeah, I think it was heavy. There was world events that were going on, and just even the subject matter of when you're talking about people with special needs. Like, it's one thing to add all these little platitudes and cliches around it, but for the parents who are in that world, it's a serious deal. Like, it's a big deal, and I just wanted to express the magnitude of how awesome the Open Door community is.
And it's an easy group to fall in love with.
Oh, it is amazing. I mean, I'm telling you what, karaoke night for Open Door is second to none. Second to none.
It's fantastic.
Were you there when the woman dressed up as Elsa?
Yes.
That was the best.
Yeah. I mean, so the one right before prom was their talent show.
Yes.
And one of my favorite things that happened while we were there is one of them wanted to do Bye 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 by NSYNC. And so they basically tell you have this list of what they want to do, and it's all in there. And then after that, so they go and sit down. I think it was either the next person or the two people after, they were scheduled to sing this other song. They're like, no, I want to sing Bye Bye Bye. And then it happened again. So another person after that said, I don't want to sing my song. I want to sing Bye Bye Bye.
You know what? Somewhere Joey Fatone and Chris Kirkpatrick are just living it up.
Oh, they're just like,
loving
yes.
This. Yeah.
Oh, that was one of my favorite things. And because the last thing they're considering is perception or we've already done that 2 times. They get excited about it.
Yeah,
their emotions are like, nope, that's what I want.
Absolutely.
Let's do that.
Oh, if the world could only be so direct.
If the world could be that simple all the time. I loved that. Yeah. So the first thing I wrote down, and it was just a direct pull from something you were preaching on, was God's glory shown through action. Expound upon that.
Yeah, I think when Jesus, Jesus says this guy, like Jesus says he's born blind so that God's works may be through him. And I think in John, it's definitely like, because the miracles are supposed to prove the divinity of Jesus, it's this guy is here so I can prove my divinity to you, not necessarily about the guy, but about Jesus. But I think that, if we're comparing God's kingdom versus, let's say, just the animal kingdom we've talked about animals on some level. We talked about the eat or be eaten, destroy or be destroyed, nature of it all.
Yeah.
And then when you have people from a church who are willing to give up their hearts and open up their doors to those people that they shouldn't care about, or you've got healing moments in which people go into professions like medicine, in which they dedicate themselves to bringing people back to life. And I think that is God's glory shining through, that God's way is different from the natural way. God ordered the world, but that humanity, I guess, is meant for a higher plane. Like, we're meant to do something different, and we're meant to bring about a world of miracles and healing and life to people, as opposed to just worrying about ourselves and our own survival.
So we're coming at the approach of miracles through the Gospel of John.
Yes.
Which I find interesting because I always think of the book of Acts.
Yeah, for sure.
And because that's when the disciples are going out and...
Or Matthew has the most miracles of any gospel too, yeah.
Yeah. It's just... It's a different perspective on it, because the idea of Jesus empowering the disciples, no, you can do this. You have the same power. And so I think of the book of Acts and, casting out demons and all just a variety of different things. But the tone is so different in the way that the miracles are talked about. It almost feels more just like an account of it versus an emotive story well,
I do think you get this guy who's like super excited, and the Pharisees keep questioning him on how did this happen? Who is this guy? What, they're trying to get the meat of it, and all he's excited about is, I can see. Come on, guys. Like, don't you get it? I couldn't see now, and now I can. So he must be something special. And but I think it's a different tone, and the reason why, the whole spring semester was geared around, what does it mean that Jesus says, "My peace I leave with you"? And in every sermon series that I've put together, it's been around finding our own peace as a church, finding peace in our world and creating peace. The next sermon series is going to be around finding peace in prayer. And so even though the miracles may not be centered on bringing individual peace to that guy, the idea that God has come in Jesus, has been present with us, and God reigns and rules over all the natural world, that's a thing that a lot of people have found peace in. And I think that John specifically doesn't, if we read it correctly, it's not about, well, why did that person survive and this person didn't? Or why does this person get healed and that person didn't? Those are really valid questions. John is specifically saying all of it's going to be okay. If you didn't survive, you're still going to end up in this glorious place that Jesus has opened up for you, because John 14, I go to prepare a place for you. If you do survive, then, oh my gosh, I'm part of a larger purpose, because, so I think that the point of John is, in the miracles especially, are introducing people to a wider, larger world that they're a part of. And if the world doesn't rest on their shoulders, but it rests on Jesus's, that is something that takes a lot of peace. It takes a lot of weight off of us to give us peace. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not on us to make things happen necessarily.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So, I'm going to skip ahead to something that I ended up writing down after the fact, because I was pondering on it, and I wrote down Jesus needing to be convinced to heal people.
Yeah,
that's a consistent theme where he often is either initially reluctant to do so, or it almost feels like he's not gonna do it, but then he's like, okay, I'm gonna do it, fine. Or that happens quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I don't know. Do you have any insight as to why you think that might be the case? Is it similar to a parent going, well, I want you to learn the lesson instead of just me doing it for you? I mean, obviously they can't heal themselves,
right?
Or at least they're not aware they can. And so, why?
Yeah, that's a really great question because you might assume like, okay, well, if you've got all the divine power in the world, just right, like lightning
You're
bolts.
healed. You're healed.
You're healed. You're healed. Everybody's healed.
Yeah.
Um, the assumption that I have around it is that we tend to believe that if everything is not perfect and whole in our view, then it is not good. And so from the standpoint of like an open door or the ableism,
Yeah.
so if somebody is in a wheelchair, they are less than. If somebody has special needs or autism, they're less than. And I think part of Jesus' reluctance to heal, or just not on the first thing on his mind, is he wants everyone of any condition to know that they're part of what God is, the God's love, not just if they're healed. So the man who's begging on the side of the road is nothing less than the person who can see in Jesus's eyes and in Jesus's world. So opening up his eyes is a metaphor for opening up all of our eyes, but it doesn't mean that the guy that didn't get healed that day, because there's probably somebody down the road, isn't less than the guy who did get healed. And I think a lot of people struggle with God because we've put God in this kind of Santa Claus box of I prayed for this and this didn't happen or this happened. And even when we talk, Andy Stanley does a good job of saying, we pray for these miracles, and we pray for the miracle of a miracle by definition is something that breaks the laws of nature, and we pray that like, oh, someone will fall in love with me. And then we get upset when they don't, as though God's going to bend their free will. So I think that my take on that question, at least that I've thought about it, is that whereas we place healing and miracles as the center of what Jesus does, from a physical standpoint, it is not the center of why he came.
No, I mean, it feels more like a byproduct of what he represents, the divinity and just things that are holy and good. And of course, healing would be a byproduct of being holy and good and divine. But it's easy to look at kind of the magical aspect of it and say, well, that's really cool because it feels like something we can't do.
Yeah.
But to quote, not quote, but to kind of point back to with the term of magic being out there, to go to J.K. Rowling and the
Always
entire overarching theme through Harry Potter that Dumbledore is always preaching to Harry is that you possess a magic that Voldemort, the primary antagonist, will never understand, is love.
Yeah.
And when you're reading it, you're like, well, Harry has a stick that can make things float. That's super cool. Or he could say Accio and something comes
way better
towards
than
him.
love.
Yeah, way better than love. Come on, it's practical. But they push at that at kind of the crux of each book, where they're trying to wrap up the concept of what each book was really talking about. And love is at the center of that, where it's so much more powerful than what the main antagonist understands.
Right.
And so it just seems so accessible in so many ways. And yet we often abuse it more than anything.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, because what's the real magic of Harry Potter? Is it that they can do all the cool things in flying cars and Accio spells, or is it that Ron, Hermione, and Harry form this unbreakable bond?
Yes.
That
friendship,
love. Yeah. That and Dumbledore's willing to sacrifice himself. And all those things.
So things that are very accessible to us, the reader, we're enamored with the magic, but the magic was inside us all along.
Can I tell you my Harry Potter protest story?
Oh, yeah.
Have I told you this?
I think I've heard about this.
For all the listeners,
I think
here,
we talked about this briefly on the first podcast.
Okay, so yeah, the only time that I have ever, like, the meanest that someone has been to me was this game we were playing called Where's Waldo, and they would dress us up as characters, and everyone had our normal picture, and they had to find us and get us a sign through our costume. So I was dressed up my senior year of college as this, sweater vest, circle glasses, mopped hair. I didn't have a scar, but I didn't even realize I looked exactly like Harry Potter. Exactly like Harry Potter. So they drop us off in the middle of downtown Fort Worth, and my friend is a 265 former all district lineman, and he's dressed as this giant wizard. So we're walking down. And I really believe that they did this on purpose. They dropped us off right by the AMC in downtown, and the Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets is playing. And there is just a whole bunch of these like Baptist church people out protesting the movie.
The early days of Harry
Potter for the witchcraft and everything. So they see us and I guess assume we're coming in cosplay to the movie and just start shouting the most hateful, hurtful, vile things at us. And it doesn't even register to us why we're being attacked. And then all of a sudden Ryan leans over and he goes, dude, I'm dressed like a wizard and you're dressed like Harry Potter. So we turned the corner real fast to go down by all the bars and the nice people that were down there. But yeah, it was funny.
That is hilarious. That is so funny.
Yeah, the only time I've been protested was for dressing up like Harry Potter.
I like that. Yeah. So along the lines of talking about Open Door, what's kind of the history of the belief that sin is caused by your parents? Mm-hmm. Something, a physical ailment is caused by your parents' sin or somebody in your family. And this is kind of judgment for that. Where does that come from?
Yeah, I mean, we see it in Exodus chapter 20 where, the Old Testament lays out this, I'm a judgment, I can't remember exactly the adjective ascribed to God, but I revisit the sins to the next generation, the next generation, the next generation. And there's some other time it's revisited. But I think in that ancient world and even not too recent future in the grand scheme of things, everything is spiritual. And so if something is wrong or out of the norm, then it's still part of the spiritual realm, and therefore the gods have cursed you. And so I think it's just this notion of like the gods who are playing chess with us, as opposed to the gods who have empowered us or the God, I should say, the God who has empowered us to go help create the world and is a blessing and a blessing giver. Not to say that God doesn't have standards and rules, but I think that's where that mindset comes in of like everything is associated with God's activity. And I think we have, I would say, evolved to a place where unless you're like really predeterministic, like if I go to lunch today and I spill salsa on my shirt, that was not God doing that to me to make sure that I'm embarrassed for the rest of the day. It's just something that happened. And as we know more about viruses and germs and all of these things, like, if you're had COVID or norovirus or whatever it is, those are living organisms that have their own choice, right? They're responding to stimuli just like we are. Mm-hmm. And that's part of the competition, right? We just happen to be smarter than them and can develop medicines.
I like how we're getting to like really heavy topics based on this. This is like leading into a lot of really heavy subtext, like, predetermination versus free will and all these things that, because like as you're saying a lot of this, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I want to react to it. But
we could go off and all sorts of tangents.
We could go crazy here and be here for 4 hours, like talking about this.
That'll be the next podcast will be called Systematic Theology, and it will just be 6 hours of going down various rabbit trails associated with each other.
Unstoppably just crazy boring for people who are like, ugh, this is just so much dogmatic, information just being thrown at my face.
There's a reason why preachers like John Wesley and Dietrich Bonhoeffer had wonderful things to say and would probably not do well in the 21st century in their packaging of their delivery.
Specifically, I always refer to Calvin.
Yeah.
John Calvin was just a very curmudgeon of a person. I don't think he would have had many people listening to him because he just was not the nicest.
Not in today's world. Back then. And shout out to Wendy McConney because she is Presbyterian by nature, by root. And so we, want to...
She's rebuked us a few times for saying nasty things on John
gave us
Calvin.
some very nice things about John Calvin. He's very into mission and outreach and things like that. So
look, Calvinistic theology has plenty of merit. It has survived and stood the test of time for a reason.
But it's also, when you say that you spilled salsa on your shirt for a reason, you lose a lot of credibility. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I get that. It's interesting to kind of dive into different theological tunnels, because there is a lot of crossover depending on how far down the tunnel you get. But I think everybody tends to lean towards something usually that is represented by a denomination, whether it's Baptist, Methodist, Catholic, whatever. And I think to a degree, all of them pull from multiple places. Like we reference Martin Luther
Right.
almost more than we reference John Wesley.
Right.
And we are not Lutheran.
And I think our underlying thematics is Wesleyan, but Luther was such a monumental figure and I think the thing that we wrestle with as Methodists, so Methodist is this beautiful conglomeration of like the Catholic Universal Church liturgy tradition and the Baptist free will Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
And it meets in the middle and because in our world, in our time and place, the traditional side of things is often frowned upon. I don't say frowned upon. It's respected in a lot of ways, but Luther did such a good job of freeing the church from the church, and allowing God to be the center of the church.
He was one of the things that launched him on his kind of crusade against what the church was doing was people having to like pay for blessings,
indulgences,
yeah.
Or you could go up like a certain set of stairs backwards on your knees to earn points in purgatory, so you wouldn't have to stay there as long. Yeah. But that's I remember learning about all that and then going to Italy and to St. Peter's Cathedral Basilica that's in Vatican City. And one, it's like built on the backs of like war slaves. But two, it was paid for by all these people that were like, hey, if you give like $1 million to this, you're not going to be in purgatory as long and you won't go to hell. And so I was like, man, because I walked in and I was like, man, this place is amazing. And I loved it. And I was thinking, wow, this is the result of some really terrible people. But
some of the greatest architecture that has lasted for so long, so many hundreds and hundreds, in some cases thousands of years, that's all slaves.
All has a terrible history.
It's that's always such a fun battle to have in your head to find something so beautiful and then try and ignore the little voice and like slaves did that. Like,
I remember going to Egypt a couple of years ago, and you're standing at the Great Pyramids, and I don't know the time frame of the building, but there's the assumption that Hebrew slaves were involved in building all those things.
There's the assumption. However, I have also heard that the majority of people who were working on that were paid day wages.
Oh, okay. That'd be awesome. Yeah.
Like, for example, the first time I ever heard that, I was watching a documentary about beer. Of all things, the history of beer.
It was invented in Egypt. Yeah.
It was. We think it was invented in that area, but that was an option for a wage. Was a bucket of beer. That was how they would pay because beer was considered a legitimate food source.
Right.
It's got fiber in it. It's very filling. That's how monks would fast for like 10 days at a time, because in the rules in Belgium and in that part of Europe, in fasting, you were still allowed to consume beer. And so they would brew certain kinds of beer that were much higher proof, and they would be just very filling. And so they could have up to 10 beers a day. And that's how they were able to not eat for like a week, they would just be drinking a lot of beer.
You just converted a lot of people to monastic life right there. It's just like, all I have to do is pray and drink beer the entire time. This is fantastic.
A lot of those monks were also eunuchs too, right?
Oh, well, don't tell them that.
Yeah, that's the joy of how convoluted like history of faith and religion and how it's all come to this spearhead and how we've used things. But I'm probably, by the way, very misled on some of my information with the Egyptians, and I'm sure there was plenty of slavery going on.
Well, I think there was, but it was. So I'm watching this documentary on Alexander the Great. That's kind of like a movie / documentary. And it was a lot better than I expected it to be. And it talks about how the Persians thought of Alexander as this savage when he comes from Greece, which is considered the center of Western civilization and most civilized. So I think it's always very natural to look at somebody that's other and assume that they're uncivilized and would do these barbaric things. And he surprises the Persians by, like, when he captures their queen and treats her like with utmost dignity And so when I hear about the Egyptians, you're kind of like, oh, well, of course, we read through the lens of the Old Testament. The Egyptians are the enemies, when really they're just this incredibly civilized, mathematically inclined civilization that, had they not been conquered and destroyed with all the wars, probably would have advanced to the level of science that we are at now.
I mean, they did so many things from an architectural standpoint and from being able to build certain things. There's like stuff in certain Egyptian tombs that are rocks that are insanely accurately carved in ways that modern architects are like, we have no idea how they did that. We can't even do that.
Right.
That kind of stuff. And then being able to move it in these tunnels, and they're like, how did they stuff like that. And so it's interesting to dive into some of that history because there's a lot of guesswork and looking into it. And so I don't know that for being so sophisticated, it would be nice if the truth was that, we didn't have, that hardcore of slaves.
Right.
It was more, we're paying you.
We pay them all a living wage and
In beer.
in beer.
Yeah, that's like not your favorite thing.
No, I mean,
as somebody who doesn't drink, you'd be like, ugh.
Right, I'd certainly take
money?
right. Can I have money or the lamb or something like that? Can I have that option?
Oh goodness. So one of the last things that I wrote that I really want to get into is recognizing when God is calling. You made a mention to God calling somebody.
Yeah.
And what is that spark in your brain of how to recognize when God is calling you?
Yeah.
What does that look like? What does that feel like? Is there a feeling? Is there a consistent look? Is it a one size fits one where it's different for everybody? What is that?
Yeah, it's a really hard thing to nail down because this is like the number one thing people struggle with, especially like when I tell them my story of feeling called into ministry and they're like, oh, I've never experienced that. I must be either lesser than or something. And I think so.
What is it?
So I
can't just dangle that fruit and just leave it.
So I was heavily involved in youth group in high school. Loved it. It was like a second home. Absolutely loved going to church. And senior Sunday, graduation Sunday, I'm part of a 3-headed sermon from 3 seniors that got picked to speak. So I do exegesis and preach a sermon without knowing what I'm doing. And the associate pastor, Anna Husman Butler, pulls me aside afterward and she goes, you have to be a preacher when you grow up. And I remember to this day saying, you don't make a lot of money, do you? And no, it was like, so I was on my way to pre-med biology. I want to be a doctor. And but I decided early on I was going to commit to the TCU campus, the Wesley campus ministry there, and got involved, became a student leader by the end of my first semester. And the hierarchy of how student leaders got to pick what they were in charge of was seniority. So everybody picked things like fellowship and missions and the fun things. And I got left with worship at the very end. But I got
sounds fun to me.
Well, and that's where, so it was like once a month, there was like 5 people that came. It was like not a big deal. But in doing that, I got to spend a lot of time with the campus minister one-on-one and like discussing these matters. And I just found I was so energized by it. And so when after my freshman year, I signed up for this trip to Thésée, France. It was a monastic community, and it was for people who feel called into ministry. And I had been, and I was, so I went to that and had no inclination whatsoever. I just wanted to go on this cool experience. I had friends that went; they weren't called into ministry, but at that moment, I kind of had this like something's coming over me. And I even went to talk to one of the monks, and he wouldn't help. I just said, I feel like I could help people through being a pastor, or I could be a doctor and help people. And he just said, and I remember him saying, the way that you feel passionate about is what is the right way. I was like, that is not helpful at all. But it does match up with what Frederick Buechner said of where your passion in the world's needs is where God's calling you. Huh. So I did that, and I went to work as a counselor at Bridgeport, our conference camp. I was sitting around with some other counselors, and this woman said, I really feel like I'm being called into ordained ministry. And I immediately was like, oh, I could never do that. And almost as soon as I said that, I can't say I heard this voice, but I felt this voice that said, yes, you will. And I was like, I just about wet my pants. It was supernatural. So having all of these wonderful, profound experiences, I still went back and didn't do anything with it at TCU.
Of course.
But I kept on getting drawn into the Wesley and the ministry. And it was after sophomore year, one Sunday, I'm teaching junior high Sunday school over the summer in June. And as we're doing this activity with 7th and 8th graders, I just had this piece come over me about this is what you're supposed to do. And so Monday morning, I got in the car, I drove over to Fort Worth, I changed my major to religion, and then I came home and told my parents about it, which they were great. I mean, my mom literally was like, yeah, we know. Like I said, I'm going to be a pastor. And they're like, yeah, we know. And I was like, well, why didn't you tell me? And she goes, because it wouldn't have been your idea and you wouldn't have done it. So it was like a 3-year journey, though, to get to this point because it was never even a consideration for me. And I think that's where I like Buechner's definition of where your passion and the world's needs meet is where God's calling you. Because I think in my purview, like I wasn't necessarily called to be a pastor of a Methodist church. I was called to love people the way that God loves them. And the Methodist church, I'd been in it for a long time. I explored other denominations in college, but it was the vehicle in which I thought, oh yeah, this is how I'm gonna be able to do this the best way, because I will be able to be where people are hurting and lonely and help them with developing systems and being present with them to feel God's love and have them uplifted by that. And hopefully I've done that to some respect. But I also think, so I think Buechner has it right when he says where the world's needs and your passion meet is where you feel called, because then it doesn't have to be a supernatural experience. It can simply be, I have this gift, I'm excited about it, and this is what the world needs in God's eyes. But I do think from some sense of knowing you're called is when it doesn't make sense. Because like with the, with my call to ministry, there was really no lineage or history or anything. It makes sense now looking back, but it really wasn't anything that anybody had ever presented to me or that I'd even thought about. And then alternatively, like the story around Open Door getting started, it didn't make sense that people were calling and saying like, hey, you've got a special needs ministry, right? And we're like, no. And like, oh, it's on your website. We're looking at it right now. So I think there are times in which we just recognize that what we are passionate about is what God has put on our heart to meet a need, and that's a calling. I think there are other times in which if it just doesn't make sense, but you feel like it has to happen, that's God calling you and saying, I mean, it's like Abraham getting called out of Ur, which is this bigger city, to go out in the middle of nowhere. And he listens and something great comes out of it. And
stuff seems to chase you as well. Like there have been times where I tried to step away from ministry because of a lot of the kind of messiness that human nature brings to it, where I've been very frustrated, even fed up with ministry because of the way that people that I was working with were handling their business and just my distaste for that. And so I've stepped away from ministry a couple times, and it chased me back down.
Yeah.
And it's always obvious when I'm in the right place and I'm like, and everything is going really well. But when things get really tough and something is going the way that you didn't think it should go, and those testing, trying moments, and being on the flip side of many of those, it's still right now it feels so obvious that this is what you're supposed to be doing, and especially when just you're making a lot of moves in things that feel for the glory of God, but give it enough time, some speed bump will come that happen, you didn't see coming, and then you're gonna get tested and you're gonna get mad about it, and so it's in those moments that I find myself reaching for something. So, but like I said, I've come back to it every time because it chases me down,
right? Yeah,
in one fashion or another.
Yeah, I haven't told a lot of people this. I've told some, but there was about a 3-month period in 2021 that it was COVID time, politics. People were just nasty to each other, and it was this: am I even moving the needle at all? Like, is this even worth it? And it's about 3 months I was considering, like, okay, maybe I'm going to do something else, and ultimately it chased me. I mean, it was kind of that same experience of like, oh, okay, no, this is like. Yeah, there was some, I can't remember. One of the experiences was there was a kid who was I think he was an 8th grader at the time here. And he called me up and he was like, I want to be baptized. And and I want to do it in the pond. So we went down and did this baptism in the pond, and then like I slipped on the clay and fell in first. It was a disaster, and like we filmed it for the congregation so they could see it. But it was a really cool moment of like I'd never done an immersion baptism in this pond. Everyone says it's gross, but it turned out to be this like super silly and holy moment. And it was just one of those moments of chasing me of no, this is like the best thing you can be doing, and it was a cool moment.
I love that.
Yeah.
I'm envisioning, "Oh brother, wherefore art thou?" where he just runs into the river and gets randomly baptized. Not that it was that random, but
yeah.
It's stuff like that. It kind of, I don't want to say snaps you out of it, but it pulls you back in, and it chases you down, and so I get that.
Yeah.
That's a nice. It's a nice way to end the podcast.
Nice way to close it out. Yeah, I think so.
something positive.
Something positive.
And fantastic. All right, well, there it is. Episode 7. Thanks for hanging out with us.
Yeah, hope you enjoyed it.
Catch you next time.
See ya.